How do the disabled find work in today's American economy? We're going to explore that question and others related to it in today's conversation. Welcome to this, another episode in the series Voices of the Disabled. I'm Joel Margolis, your host and interviewer for today. With me today is Adam Ballard, a staff professional at Access Living, who has been with Access Living, I believe, 8 years? 7 years. And today, Adam, you and I are going to explore the world of D.A.W.N, which, if I have it correctly, is an acronym spelled D.A.W.W.N?
That's correct.
Yeah. And what in the world does that acronym stand for?
It stands for Disabled Americans Want Work Now.
And when was D.A.W.N begun?
D.A.W.N started about 20 years ago, sometime in the mid-90s. Renee Luna, who was the community organizer for employment at Access Living, started it and ran the group up until very recently.
Now, how would you define the mission of D.A.W.N if you were going to do so in careful detail?
So I think D.A.W.N's mission is to create a just world where people with disabilities have access to the same employment opportunities that everyone else does. Now, the way we do that is by looking to change laws or policies to influence decision makers, whether they're elected officials or more bureaucratic officials. We try to influence the business community when we can, but that's difficult. It's difficult to have leverage there. But we try to use the tools of community organizing, popular education, to really give people the tools they need to change the way the world works.
Isn't the primary tool for all of this really the Americans with Disabilities Act?
The Americans with Disabilities Act was intended for sure to improve employment outcomes. It hasn't, and it's something that the national disability community is aware of and unhappy about. Senator Tom Harkin, who is the chief sponsor, has spoken about it a lot over the past couple of years. His biggest regret is that the ADA's main area of unfulfilled promise is in the area of employment.
Well, I'm very struck by what you say, because I've certainly met any number of fully abled people who seem to be under the impression that the ADA basically ended problems for people with disabilities seeking employment. You're saying otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, the ADA did a lot in the areas of public accommodation. It's changed the way the world looks in a lot of ways. There's more physical access in places where there wasn't before. But yeah, there was a hope at the beginning that the ADA would also lead to better employment outcomes, and it just hasn't happened.
Well, if it hasn't happened, are there any figures, even if they're only approximations, as to what the rate of unemployment amongst the disabled is in contemporary America?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you count, but I think reliably you can say that 60 to maybe as many as 80% of all disabled adults in this country are pretty chronically unemployed.
Let me make sure I heard you correctly. Some 60 to 80% of disabled adults in America are unemployed chronically?
That's our understanding. It gets difficult because, again, as you may know, in the official unemployment numbers, those who have stopped looking for work aren't counted in that anymore.
Are not counted anymore.
So it's a little harder to get at the exact number of those, what number of those people have dropped out of the job market, so to speak, because of disability. But yeah, I mean, when we look at the numbers, it looks like best case scenario is 60%, and it could be as high as 80%.
Now, when you talk about ADA trying to provide opportunities but not doing very much, and you speak about D.A.W.N as trying to level the playing field, if I put it that way, what are some of the specific actions that D.A.W.N takes to try and achieve its goals?
So I think, to speak to some of the things that D.A.W.N has done, D.A.W.N has been instrumental in the past in creating a statewide employment task force. Renee, who I mentioned earlier, the founder of D.A.W.N, is still an active participant in that task force. So, at policy tables, the disability voice is being heard. So D.A.W.N is responsible for that. D.A.W.N has also in the past taken up issues like sub-minimum wage. There are a lot of sheltered workshop settings around the country. We don't think there's many, if any, in the city itself here, but there are many around the country settings that pay people with disabilities far less than a minimum wage to do like piecemeal type work. So D.A.W.N has been involved in the past in the fight to try and end that practice, and provide real competitive and livable wage jobs for people with disabilities, not just those kinds of programs.
Now, you mentioned a statewide employment task force on the disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that and D.A.W.N.'s role in it?
Well, I mean, like I said, that work was done before I was very active with D.A.W.N myself, but I know that D.A.W.N did a lot of the work with legislators because it was created by an act of the General Assembly. So
a specific piece of legislation?
Yeah, so there was legislation involved. So D.A.W.N did the legislative work in Springfield to make that happen. Another recent statewide legislative victory was Employment First, which was passed, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and is supposed to be providing a preference towards competitive integrated employment for people with disabilities, especially in either state work or businesses that receive state money. So that was another recent legislative victory. Something that we're working on currently is a resolution at the city level for city council to create a new employment task force at the city level. There was in the past under Mayor Daley a citywide employment task force for people with disabilities, but its mission wasn't as clearly defined, and their work was a little more open-ended. And they produced some recommendations, but there wasn't a lot of accountability tied into those recommendations.
Now, you mentioned the creation of a statewide employment task force on the disabled. Does D.A.W.N have a permanent voice in that task force?
Yes, and like I said, right now it's Renee Luna who's that voice, and I believe that, and I'm not sure when, but whenever Renee's term on that task force or his time on that task force is done, we'll make sure that another D.A.W.N member takes that spot.
Now, you mentioned the use of the disabled in sub-minimum wage work settings, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Are you in effect saying that there are places that are more or less sweatshops using the disabled?
That's probably a pretty good way to describe it. It's a federal program called the 14C certificate that allows, and some of the biggest offenders are nonprofits, actually, like Goodwill is a major user of 14C certificates. And it allows them to pay disabled workers less than minimum wage for their work.
Aren't there some constraints on when and where they can do that, or limits on the use of that?
There are, but and again, not knowing the details, I can say that it's still a lot more widespread than it should be as a practice.
Are there efforts to implement a program of inspection and monitoring to try and curb these abuses?
Yeah, there's definitely the hope that will happen. Also, Senator Harkin, who I mentioned earlier, who was one of the lead sponsors for the ADA, before he's retired from the Senate now, but one of the last things he worked on was trying to push towards legislation that would undo that loophole that so many of these companies exploit. We got it kind of halfway turned back. The usage of these sub-minimum wage workshops has lessened, but it has not gone away.
Now, over time, I assume that D.A.W.N receives a great deal of feedback about the employment landscape. So therefore, over the course of the years, do you begin to pick up the sense that there are employers who are, if I may put it this way, disabled friendly, and that there are some other employers who are known for being disabled hostile, if I may put it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely more we know who the good actors are. It's hard to know who especially bad actors are because discrimination against people with disabilities in employment is so rampant. It's kind of hard to pick out someone who's especially bad. But we do know, we have learned about who some of the better examples are, and I would cite Walgreens as a company who does pretty well in store, but also they do a lot of employment of people with disabilities in their logistics, their supply chain work. So a lot, some of their warehouses have been made very accessible for disabled workers, and they're intentionally hire a high number of disabled workers to work in those those warehouses. Sorry, not workshops. It's the opposite. At very very reasonable wages. So we would hold up Walgreens for sure as an example of how it can be done right.
Now, Walgreens is a very large-scale employer.
Mm-hmm.
In case amongst our audience there are some listening who are small business owners, are there any financial incentives or tax incentives for the employer in hiring the disabled?
I think there are some limited ones, but I think that might be part of the broader policy solution is to expand those kinds of programs and to put more resources into that kind of thing, because I think that incentives for small business owners to hire disabled workers is a really good idea. And like I said, it's out there, but I don't think it's out there enough to make widespread change yet.
Is D.A.W.N. doing anything to try and boost those incentives for the small to medium-sized employer to hire the disabled?
As far as right now, that's not our focus, but in the past, I wouldn't know it. I'd have to defer to people who have been involved with D.A.W.N. longer, but I think it's definitely something that we would be interested in looking into again in the future if we haven't already.
Now, with regard to those employers that might be described as disabled unfriendly, okay, is there, so to speak, a track record of some employers who have been sued or taken to court more than once or twice by disabled individuals? Has anyone created what you might call a legal history of corporations that have been frequently found to deny the disabled?
I wouldn't know for sure as far as the answer to that question. I am sure that Equip for Equality or another protection and advocacy agency would be likely to have that kind of information. I do know that, and I can't remember which company it was, but there was a really egregious case a couple of years ago of some kind of meat producer, I think chicken producer. I don't want to misname the company, so I won't try. But it was a name I recognized. Some relatively large meat, chicken, whatever producer,
processing firm,
right, was really was really terribly, and it wasn't so much discrimination. They had disabled workers, but they were mistreating them so terribly. Docking, stealing wages, keeping them locked away. I mean, it was just a really bad case.
A truly egregious case.
Yeah. So you do hear about those kinds of things once in a while. But as far as like a pattern of discrimination, an organization that focuses more solely on the legal side of disability rights would be better equipped to answer that question than I would. But I do know from talking to attorneys who work in employment discrimination, that sphere, that proving discrimination is really, really hard legally. The courts, through precedents and have made it very, very difficult for even a pretty obvious case to be proven in a court of law. So that's part of the reason too why we focus on making sure that we're building political power to put pressure on people in office and people making the decisions, whether they're elected officials or bureaucrats, to proactively make the changes that will fix things, because proving employment discrimination legally has become very difficult.
Has been an uphill battle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned both elected officials and civil service bureaucrats. Mm-hmm. In the case of elected officials, is D.A.W.N. taking any specific actions regarding individual elected officials, such as working on the campaigns of those who have been disabled friendly, or highlighting the hostility of those who have been unfriendly to the disabled?
Yes and no. So because D.A.W.N. is for lack of a better word, housed at Access Living, and because Access Living has a 501c3 distinction, we're not allowed to do partisan political work. As D.A.W.N., no, we don't do that kind of work. We do work with elected officials on things like, legislative advocacy. We definitely are able to do things like, hold up and promote legislators who we think are doing good work. But as far as helping them with campaigns or endorsements or contributions,
that might possibly cross the line.
Right. So we encourage any of our members if they feel strongly about certain candidate, to support them, individually, and to volunteer for camp. We want people with disabilities involved in the political process, but for an agency with a 501c3 distinction, it becomes very difficult to do that work as Access Living or as D.A.W.N.
Now, if working on something such as the campaigns of elected officials is legally problematic, has D.A.W.N., however, taken actions vis-a-vis state and federal government agencies, i.e. civil service bureaucracies, where there is not a partisan question involved?
Yeah, and I would say that that's probably where most of our efforts end up directed.
Could you give us examples of a couple of those efforts?
Yeah, so again, on the current campaign, we're working on both a legislative angle and a more bureaucratic angle. We need city council, obviously, to be the one that passes the resolution, and we need the mayor's support. So we've been working with the alderman and with the mayor, but on the implementation side, it's going to be the mayor's office for people with disabilities, which is a non-political office, to actually implement the task force. So we've been, in working very strongly with Commissioner Tamley and her staff at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities to make sure that happens on that end.
And have you taken any action with regard to state of Illinois level bureaucracies that deal with the problems of employment, labor, and the like?
Yeah, it's been a few years, but a few years ago there was another issue that D.A.W.N. won, and it was that the state's bureau, I think Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, was requiring that that people with disabilities who came to them for services pass an IQ test. So we felt that was discriminatory and not helpful. So D.A.W.N. actually did do a protest at their offices in Springfield to protest that, and a few months later they withdrew that requirement.
Now, if we were to speak for a moment about entrepreneurial efforts in employing the disabled, an idea that has intrigued me for a number of years, but which I personally do not have the time or money to get off the ground, is the idea that disabled individuals with complementary skills might start firms of their own. For instance, an architect who's now in a wheelchair and someone with real estate management experience who's now deaf, et cetera, might form a housing development corporation. Has D.A.W.N. ever made any effort to serve as an incubator for disabled individuals who wanted to form groups and start firms of their own?
I don't think we have in the past. I think there's two things there's one program that we're working on now that I think could address that and something else. So another barrier that we notice constantly is that people with disabilities just don't often have basic job skills that they need, like the knowledge of how to do an interview or how to have their resume ready. So D.A.W.N. is bringing back a program that we had until a few years ago called the Job Empowerment Club.
But in addition to those that you've just mentioned, aren't there also thousands of individuals who had long work histories but became disabled, for instance, in middle age?
And that's why I mentioned the Job Empowerment Club, because one of the D.A.W.N. leaders who's going to be helping bring that back is in that similar situation. As someone who had a long career, became disabled later in life, and now wants to use his knowledge and his connections to connect people with disabilities either to existing work or, again, like you mentioned, starting their own businesses, their own firms. He was a small business owner before he became disabled. So we're hoping that Job Empowerment Club will focus on both those things, both job readiness, just basic job readiness, but also creating connections so that people with disabilities can start their own businesses and do their own work.
In terms of creating connections for those who were disabled but had long work histories and wish to meet others with complementary or matching skills to start firms as a cooperative group, is it possible that an organization such as Access Living could serve as the incubator or the meeting point for such individuals?
I think it's definitely something that we're considering, yes. I think it's possible. We just have to see how it best makes sense for that to happen, whether it's Access Living to be directly involved or through some other mechanism.
And there would have to be some funding, I assume.
Right. There always has to be funding.
That's often the case in the world of the disabled.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that the funding can be found, because I, for one, and I know there are others, would love to see some serious organizational effort at helping disabled individuals start firms of their own, which to me at least would be a very proactive thing to do.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for coming in today. I think we provided a great deal of information for those listening today. I would like to thank those of you who watched for joining us once again, myself, Joel Margolis, and our guest, Adam Ballard from Access Living, representing D.A.W.N, Disabled Americans Who Want Work Now. And for those who would like more information about D.A.W.N, how should they contact Access Living?
So they can call our main number at 312-640-2100.
That was 312-640-2100.
Yeah. And just ask for Adam. Ask for me. Ask for Adam Ballard.
And it's that simple.
It's that simple.
Thank you all for joining us here at Voices for the Disabled. I'm Joel Margolis, your host, and please come and join us again as we try to shed some light on the world of the disabled. Goodbye, but just for now.